I missed the last bus home. Rain soaked through my coat completely. A stranger opened her bar door. "Come inside," she said. "Before you freeze." I didn't know her name yet. By morning, everything about my life had changed. 6 months later, she asked me to choose. I chose the one thing my family forbade. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old, a nurse working night shifts at a Chicago hospital, raised in a strict Midwestern household where certain feelings were never spoken aloud. I had spent my whole life following a script written by my mother. A script that never once imagined a woman like Mia Alvarez walking into it. The night I missed my bus, I was exhausted from a double shift. My umbrella broken. My phone dead. Standing alone under a flickering streetlight in the freezing October rain. A neon sign glowed across the street. The Copper Kettle, a small bar I'd walked past 100 times but never once entered. Its warm light suddenly irresistible. The woman behind the counter had dark curly hair pulled into a loose bun and forearms lined with faded ink. And she looked up the second the door chimed. "You look like a drowned cat," she said, sliding a towel across the bar without waiting for me to ask. Her voice carrying a rough kindness I wasn't used to. I laughed for the first time in weeks. A real laugh. Surprising even myself. And she grinned like she won something small but important. Her name was Mia. She told me, owner of the bar, her late father had left her. And she made me a hot toddy on the house while my clothes dried by the space heater. We talked until closing. About nothing important. My job. Her father. The leaky roof she couldn't afford to fix. And somehow 2 hours disappeared like 20 minutes. When I finally called a cab, she walked me to the curb and said, "Come back sometime." Drowned cat. And I found myself hoping I would. I told myself it was just a friendly bartender being kind to a stranger. Nothing more. Even as I found excuses to walk past the Copper Kettle all week. By the 4th visit, Mia had started keeping a mug behind the bar just for me, and I had stopped pretending I was there for anything but her. We fell into an easy rhythm. My hospital shifts ending right as her bar closed. And most nights I'd linger at the counter long after the last customer left. She told me about growing up in this neighborhood. About her mother who'd moved back to Puerto Rico. About the sister she was helping raise since their father died. I told her about nursing school. About the panic attacks I hid from my coworkers. About a life that looked perfect on paper and felt hollow underneath. One night she caught me staring at her hands as she wiped down glasses. And instead of looking away, she held my gaze until my face went red. "You know," she said quietly, "you've been coming here for 6 weeks and you've never once mentioned a boyfriend." I didn't answer. And she didn't push. I went home that night and sat on my bathroom floor for an hour, replaying every moment I'd spent avoiding an answer I already knew. The next week I brought her a scarf for the cold walk home. Something small. And the way her whole face softened told me it wasn't small to her. We started closing the bar together in silence sometimes. Just stacking chairs. Wiping tables. Existing in the same space without needing to fill it with words. On a Tuesday with no customers, she put on an old record and asked me to dance. Right there between the empty booths. Her hand warm against my back. I felt something crack open in my chest. Something I'd kept sealed since I was 16 and told myself certain feelings simply weren't meant for me. "I like you, Sarah," she said, still swaying slowly. "I've liked you since the drowned cat night. I just needed you to catch up." I couldn't speak. Instead I kissed her. Clumsy and terrified and certain all at once. And the bar around us disappeared until it was only her hands. Her breath. Her steadiness. We didn't call it anything at first. Just 2 women who found reasons to be near each other. Texting good morning. Sharing lunch breaks on opposite schedules. Mia never rushed me. Never asked for labels I wasn't ready to give. Though I saw the question sitting quietly behind her eyes every time we said goodbye. I started noticing small things. How she remembered my coffee order. How she saved me the last slice of her sister's birthday cake. How safe her apartment felt. My coworker Priya noticed the change in me first. The humming in the break room. The phone I suddenly guarded. And she smiled knowingly but never pried. One evening Mia introduced me properly to her younger sister, Camila, a sharp-tongued college sophomore who studied me like I was a puzzle she intended to solve. 038. So you're the nurse, Camila said. Arms crossed. The one who's had my sister smiling like an idiot for 2 months. Mia groaned, but her ears turned pink. Camila and I ended up talking for hours that night about everything from nursing school to her art classes. And by the end she'd claimed me as family. I hadn't told a single person in my own family about Mia. And the silence between my two worlds was starting to feel less like privacy and more like shame. My mother called weekly asking if I'd met anyone at church, mentioning David Reyes, our family friend's son, with a hopefulness that made my stomach twist. He's a good man, Sarah. Steady job. Good family, she'd say. And I'd change the subject, my throat tightening around words I didn't know how to say. Mia never asked me to choose between her and my family, but I saw how carefully she avoided asking about them, protecting herself from an answer she feared. One rainy afternoon she found me crying in her apartment after a call with my mother, and she just held me. No questions. Until my breathing slowed. You don't owe me an announcement, she whispered into my hair. But you owe yourself a life you're not hiding inside of. I clung to her tighter. That night I decided, quietly and privately, that I loved her. Though the word felt enormous and dangerous, like something I couldn't yet say out loud. We spent a whole Sunday building a bookshelf together in her apartment, laughing at our terrible instructions, and somewhere between the screws and swearing, I felt truly happy. Camila started calling me Sarah with the boring shoes, an affectionate insult that meant, without either of us saying it, that I now belong somewhere. Mia's regulars at the bar began greeting me by name, saving me the corner stool, treating me like I'd always been part of the Copper Kettle's small, loyal family. For the first time since I was a teenager, I stopped feeling like I was performing a version of myself designed to please everyone but me. I finally told Priya the truth over lunch, watching her face carefully, and she just squeezed my hand and said, "About time. You've been glowing for weeks." Her easy acceptance gave me a strange kind of courage, a small proof that maybe not everyone would react the way I feared my mother would. Mia asked me, gently, if I'd ever consider telling my parents, not pushing, just wondering aloud while we lay tangled together on her narrow apartment couch. "I'm scared of losing them," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I'm scared of losing you too, but in a different, quieter way." She kissed my forehead and said nothing. We agreed, without much discussion, to keep our relationship private from my family a little longer, a decision that felt safe then and dangerous later. My mother started pressuring me harder about David, arranging a dinner just to catch up, and I agreed, mostly to buy myself more silence and more time. David turned out to be easy company, funny in a dry, self-deprecating way, and oddly, he kept steering our conversation away from anything resembling romance. At the end of dinner he said, quietly, "You don't have to pretend with me, Sarah." I recognized that particular kind of tired. I froze, unsure what he meant. I didn't understand his comment until weeks later, but I filed it away. A strange loose thread in a night I mostly wanted to forget. Mia and I kept building our life in small increments. A shared drawer at her apartment, a toothbrush at mine. Plans forming without either of us naming them plans. The first real crack appeared when Camila accidentally posted a photo of us together, laughing at a 4th of July barbecue, tagged with both our names. My cousin Denise, who worked with me at the same hospital, saw it first. And within a week the break room whispers had reached my supervisor's office. I was called in for a friendly conversation about professionalism, though nothing specific was named, and I left the meeting shaking with a fury I couldn't fully explain. Denise had always resented me. Ever since childhood. When I'd won a scholarship she'd wanted. And I began to suspect her concern wasn't concern at all. Rumors spread fast through the hospital. Twisted versions of my life told by people who knew nothing real about it. Only what fit their assumptions. Mia noticed the exhaustion in my face before I said a word. And when I finally told her, her jaw tightened in a way I'd never seen. I hate that you have to hide, she said. I hate that loving me costs you something every single day. I didn't know how to comfort her. We fought for the first time that week. Not about each other, but about how much of myself I was still keeping locked away from everyone else. When are you going to stop being ashamed of me? Mia asked, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. And the words landed like a slap. I'm not ashamed of you, I said. I'm terrified of my mother. And even as I said it, I heard how thin the difference sounded out loud. She left the apartment that night to walk Camila home, and I sat alone in the dark, replaying every excuse I'd made for 8 months straight. My mother called the next morning, cheerful, asking about David again, and something in me finally, quietly, broke apart under the weight of pretending. I didn't answer her. Instead, I stared at my phone for an hour, weighing a truth that could either free me or cost me everything I'd known. At the hospital, the whispers grew bolder. Someone left an anonymous note in my locker, cruel and vague, and I couldn't stop my hands from shaking as I read it. Priya found the note before I could hide it, her face going pale with anger, and she marched straight to HR without asking my permission first. An investigation began, quiet and procedural. But it meant my personal life was now sitting on paper in a file somewhere. Out of my control entirely. Denise avoided my eyes in the hallway for a week, which told me everything I needed to know about who had written that note in my locker. Mia and I barely spoke during that stretch. Both of us bruised in different ways. Both too proud to be the first to reach out again. Camila showed up at my apartment uninvited, insisting I fix things with her sister, saying, she's miserable. And so are you. So what's the actual problem? The problem, I said, is that I don't know how to be brave the way she is. Camila just shook her head like I'd missed something obvious. She's not brave because she's fearless, Camila said. She's brave because she keeps showing up scared. That's the whole trick. Sarah. Nobody's actually fearless. I went to the copper kettle that night, and Mia looked up from behind the bar like she'd been hoping and dreading it in equal measure. I'm sorry, I said, before she could speak. I've been so busy protecting everyone else's comfort that I forgot to protect us. Her eyes filled with tears. We didn't fix everything that night, but we started, sitting together until closing, finally saying out loud all the fears we'd been swallowing separately. The hospital investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, since there had been none, but it left a permanent unease between me and my own workplace. Denise transferred to another floor shortly after, and though nothing was ever officially confirmed, I always believed she knew exactly what she'd done to me. My mother finally noticed my distance during our weekly calls, and she pressed harder, asking if something was wrong, if David had said something to upset me. There's someone else. Mom, I finally said, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own voice through the phone. Who? She asked, already brightening. Already imagining some acceptable young man from church I hadn't mentioned before. And I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Her name is Mia, I said. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Don't say things like that over the phone. Sarah, she finally said. Her voice flat and careful, like she was speaking to someone unwell. I hung up crying. Not from her cruelty exactly, but from the specific, quiet horror of being unseen by someone who was supposed to know me completely. My father called an hour later, and I braced myself for another version of the same rejection, my whole body tense with dread. Your mother's upset, he said carefully, but I want you to know something. Sarah. I've known for years. I've just been waiting for you to trust me. I sat down hard on my kitchen floor. Done. The twist of his words rearranging everything I'd assumed about my own family for a decade. How? I whispered. You never said anything. He laughed softly. Sadly. Because I was scared too. Of saying it wrong. Of losing you before you were ready. He told me he'd suspected since I was 17. Since a summer camp counselor I couldn't stop talking about. Since a certain look I'd never had for boys. I should have said something sooner, he admitted. I let your mother's fear become the loudest voice in our house. That was my failure. Not yours. For the first time in years, I felt something like hope crack through the grief. A single door left open where I'd expected only walls. My mother didn't call for 3 weeks. And the silence between us felt like a wound I checked every day, waiting to see if it would heal or fester. Mia and I moved in together that spring. A small apartment above a bakery. The smell of bread every morning becoming the smell of home. Camila helped us paint the walls a soft yellow, insisting it would counteract Sarah's gloomy nurse energy. And for the first time I didn't mind being teased. David reached out unexpectedly, asking to meet for coffee, and I went, curious about the strange comment he'd made at that dinner months earlier. I'm gay too. Sarah, he said, stirring his coffee without looking up. My mother arranged that dinner hoping we'd fall in love and fix us both. I laughed, startled. Then felt a wave of tenderness for him. 2 people quietly performing the same impossible role their families had written for them. We became genuine friends after that, comparing notes on impossible mothers. And he became one of the first people outside Mia's circle to meet her properly. My mother finally agreed to see me, though only for lunch. Only at a restaurant. Only with careful distance built into every part of the invitation. I don't understand this, she said, pushing food around her plate. I raised you in the church. I don't know where I went wrong. You didn't go wrong. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not broken. I'm just finally telling you the truth about who I am. She didn't respond, just stared at her hands, and I realized this wasn't going to be a single conversation but a long, uncertain unraveling. Weeks passed with no invitation to family dinners, no calls asking about Mia. A careful erasure that hurt worse than outright anger would have. Mia held me through those nights, never once suggesting I should simply give up on my mother. Always saying, grief has its own timeline. Love. At work, a new rumor started. This time claiming I'd been fired for inappropriate conduct. A lie so specific it had to have come from Denise again. I confronted her directly this time. In the hospital parking lot. My hands shaking with an anger I'd suppressed since childhood. Why do you hate me this much? I asked. She finally admitted, quietly, that she'd always envied my life, my parents' attention, my apparent ease with the world. You never seemed ashamed of anything, she said bitterly. And I've spent my whole life ashamed of everything. I realized, sadly, we were more alike than different. Just as things at work began settling, Mia received a job offer from a bar management company in Seattle, a real chance to grow beyond the copper kettle. She didn't tell me for 3 days, and when she finally did, guilt was written across every line of her face like a confession. I don't want to leave you, she said. But I don't know how to say no to this either. I felt the ground shift again. Differently this time. We fought about it. Not cruelly. But honestly. 2 people terrified of asking the other to sacrifice something enormous for their sake. Take it, I finally said. Though it broke something in my chest to say it. I won't be the reason you shrink your whole life smaller. She left for Seattle 6 weeks later. And our relationship became a patchwork of video calls, time zones, and increasingly long silences neither of us meant. Camila stayed behind to finish college, and she became my closest confidant during those months, both of us missing the same person in different ways. My mother, unexpectedly, started calling again during that stretch, perhaps sensing my loneliness. perhaps finally softening under the weight of missing her daughter. "Are you doing okay?" she asked one Sunday. And though she didn't mention Mia by name, it was the first crack of warmth in months. I started visiting my parents' house again. Small dinners, careful conversations, my father quietly running interference whenever my mother's questions edged too close to judgment. 3 months into the distance, Mia's calls started coming less often, shorter, distracted, and a familiar fear crept back into my chest like an old habit. Camila mentioned Fan. That Mia had been spending a lot of time with a coworker named Jordan, someone she described only as intense and very into Mia. I told myself I trusted her, but doubt is patient, and it found small cracks to grow through during every unanswered text and delayed reply. One night Mia called late, her voice strange, and told me she needed to talk about something that had happened at a work dinner with Jordan. My stomach dropped before she even finished the sentence. Old fears about being left behind rushing forward faster than any actual explanation could. "Nothing happened," she said quickly. "But Jordan kissed me, and I pulled away immediately, and I've been sick about it ever since. I needed you to hear it from me." I sat in silence for a long moment, torn between gratitude for her honesty and grief that the distance had made space for it to happen at all. "I'm not angry you told me," I said finally, "but I'm scared. Mia. I'm scared this distance is turning us into people who drift instead of choosing each other." We talked for hours that night, rawer than we'd ever been, both admitting how much the separation had worn down parts of us we hadn't realized were fragile. "Come home," I whispered near dawn. "Not because of Jordan, but because I miss my actual life. And my actual life has you in it." She promised to think seriously about transferring back, though nothing was decided, and I hung up unsure whether hope or dread weighed heavier in my chest. My mother, sensing my distress during a visit, asked directly for the first time, "Is everything all right with Mia?" It was the first time she'd said her name. I broke down at the kitchen table, telling her everything: the distance, the fear, the exhausting effort of loving someone across 2,000 miles. My mother, to my complete shock, reached over and held my hand. "I still don't fully understand this," she said, "but I don't want you carrying this alone." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a door opening slightly wider than it had been in over a year, and I clung to that small mercy. 2 weeks later, Mia called to say she'd requested a transfer back to Chicago, citing family reasons, and I felt relief flood through me like warm water. But the transfer wasn't approved right away, tangled in corporate paperwork, and the uncertainty stretched our reunion out for another agonizing month. During that month, I threw myself into small preparations, repainting the spare room, planning a homecoming dinner, trying to build something solid to hold on to. Camila and I grew even closer during the wait, both of us pretending confidence we didn't fully feel about whether Mia would actually make it back. My father started asking about Mia too, small careful questions over the phone, and I realized he'd been quietly, patiently waiting for permission to care. Then, without warning, Mia called with news that shattered the fragile hope I'd been building for weeks. The transfer had been denied entirely. "They want me to stay through the fiscal year," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I don't know how to fix this." I felt something inside me go cold and quiet, an old fear resurfacing that love, no matter how real, might not be enough against circumstance. "Then I'll come to you," I said suddenly, surprising myself as much as her. "There are nursing jobs everywhere. Chicago isn't the only place I can be needed." The idea terrified me. Leaving my hospital, my parents just as we were rebuilding something fragile, but it also felt, strangely, like the bravest thing I'd ever considered. I applied to 3 hospitals in Seattle that same week, telling no one except Camila, wanting to be certain before I risked hoping out loud. My mother found out anyway, through my father. and I braced myself for another wave of disapproval I didn't have the strength left to absorb. Instead, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, sitting stiffly on my couch, and said, "I don't want you to move across the country still angry at me." "I'm not angry," I said carefully. "I'm just tired of waiting for you to be ready to love all of me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I am trying, Sarah," she said. "I know trying isn't the same as arriving, but I need you to know I haven't stopped trying." It wasn't the apology I'd once imagined, but it was honest. And for the first time I let myself believe it might eventually be enough. One of the Seattle hospitals called back within days, offering an interview, and everything that had felt theoretical suddenly became terrifyingly, thrillingly real. I flew out for the interview, and Mia met me at the airport, both of us crying before I'd even reached the end of the terminal. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "But I wanted to. I wanted to choose you the way you chose distance for me first." The interview went well, better than I expected, and I walked out of the hospital lightheaded with the strange, dizzying possibility of an entirely new life. That night, sitting on Mia's small balcony overlooking the city, she turned to me suddenly, nervous in a way I'd rarely seen from her. "I know we haven't used big words yet," she said, "but I love you, Sarah. I've loved you since a stranger walked into my bar soaking wet." "I love you too," I said, the words finally, easily, unafraid, leaving my mouth after months of carrying them silently, carefully, like something breakable. 2 weeks after I returned home to wait for the job's official offer, I got a call from my father with news that stopped my heart. My mother had collapsed at church, rushed to the emergency room, a suspected heart episode that left the entire family reeling with fear and confusion. I drove to the hospital faster than I'd ever driven in my life, my hands shaking on the wheel, my mind circling every unresolved conversation between us. She was stable when I arrived, hooked to monitors, smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. And something in me broke open completely. "I was so scared," she admitted quietly, gripping my hand from the hospital bed, "that I'd die before I told you I was proud of you." I held back tears, unsure if I'd heard her correctly, unsure if fear was simply loosening words she might not have meant to say out loud. "I've watched you," she continued, "become someone braver than I ever managed to be. I don't want fear to be the last thing I gave you." Mia flew back from Seattle the moment I called her, sitting quietly in the hospital hallway, giving my family the space to have this reckoning first. When my mother was stable enough for visitors, I brought Mia into the room, my hands trembling with a fear I couldn't fully name anymore. "Mom," I said, "this is Mia, the woman I love." My mother studied her for a long, silent moment that stretched painfully across the sterile room. "Thank you," my mother finally said, "for taking care of my daughter when I was too afraid to." Mia's eyes filled instantly with tears. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was real. And real mattered more to me now than the polished version I'd once imagined needing. During recovery, my mother asked Mia dozens of small, careful questions about her sister, her bar, her plans. Awkward but genuine attempts at understanding. Camila visited too, immediately charming my mother with stories about Sarah's terrible taste in throw pillows, easing the tension with careful, deliberate humor. My father pulled Mia aside quietly one afternoon and said, "Thank you for not giving up on her, even when we made it so hard." The Seattle hospital called with an official offer the same week, and suddenly I faced the hardest decision yet, choosing between healing family and starting our future. My mother, still weak but stubborn, insisted I take it. "Don't stay here out of guilt," she said. "Go build your life. Call me every Sunday." "I'm not going that far," I said, laughing through tears. "I'm just going to Seattle, Mom. Not the moon." She squeezed my hand and smiled weakly. Denise, strangely, sent a short apology text before I left, admitting her jealousy had made her cruel, asking, awkwardly, for a fresh start someday. I didn't fully forgive her. Not yet. But I appreciated the honesty. Another small door left open in a year that had taught me about doors. David threw us a small going-away dinner, insisting on introducing me to his own boyfriend for the first time, both of us finally living unguarded. Priya cried harder than anyone at my hospital farewell, promising loudly to visit Seattle at least twice a year. No excuses accepted. Packing up my apartment felt strange, dismantling a life I'd built carefully around fear, replacing it with one built deliberately around honesty instead. My mother insisted on helping me pack, folding sweaters with careful hands, occasionally pausing to hold something and simply look at me for a long moment. I'm sorry it took a hospital bed to say the right things, she admitted quietly. I hope you know I mean them now. Not just from fear. I know, Mom, I said. And for the first time in years, I believed the words completely, without bracing myself for a hidden condition attached. The morning I left for Seattle, my entire family came to the airport, an image I couldn't have imagined possible just 1 year earlier. Mia waited for me on the other end this time, not as a stranger offering shelter from rain, but as a whole future standing at arrivals. We found a small apartment near the water, close enough to the Copper Kettle's sister location Mia was helping open, close enough to build something lasting. Camila visited constantly, calling it checking on my sister's terrible decisions, though her smile always gave away how happy she actually was for us. My mother called every Sunday exactly as promised, awkward at first, then warmer. Slowly learning to ask about Mia the way she'd once asked about David. A year after that rainy night at the bus stop, Mia proposed quietly on our balcony. No grand audience. Just the two of us in the city lights. I said yes before she even finished the question, both of us laughing and crying at once. Finally. Fully. Unafraid of who might be watching. Not every wound fully healed. Not every relative fully understood. But I had built a life I no longer needed to hide. And that was everything. I used to think missing that bus was the worst luck of my whole life. A small disaster on an ordinary rainy night in Chicago. Now I know it was the beginning of the only life I ever actually wanted. Standing in the rain, waiting for a door to open. Then